House of the Dragon finally has an opening credits scene, and like the original Game of Thrones opening was based around showing us the vast, sprawling locations across Essos and Westeros, House of the Dragon tells us of the history of the Targaryens. It begins with an icon representing the doom of Valyria, a cataclysm a century before Aegon's conquest that saw the end of the Dragon Lord civilization when a catastrophic explosion caused the eruption of all 14 flames together. Except the Targaryens escaped it, they survived and became the last Dragon Lords when Daenerys Targaryen foresaw this doom 12 years before, and the family sold everything they had and moved to Dragonstone, taking their dragons with them. A trail of blood leaks down from this icon and splits into three, representing the three Targaryens who conquered Westeros, Aegon and his two sister wives, Visenya and Rhaenys. We don't see a third icon here, but that's likely because this opening is focusing on the line of kings, and that only passes through Aegon and Rhaenys' children. The icon on Aegon's cog is a little bit unclear, but it seems to contain a sword, likely Blackfire, Aegon's Valyrian steel blade, as we see a number of other kings also symbolized by their crowns and swords. The blood then flows out and down a level into a new icon. Each time the blood flows down a level represents a new generation, while flowing across the flat represents brothers or sisters or wives. Often both at the same time, of course, because they're Targaryens. The next icon seems to represent Aenys I, skipping Maegor the Cruel because he was an illegitimate king who usurped the Iron Throne from his brother for 6 years before it reverted back to Aenys. Aenys is represented by a simple crown that's different to his father's. The bloodlines then split from Aenys into two. Though he and Alyssa do have 5 children, we don't see all of those lines here. And 2 of these streams rejoin down on the next level, as Jaehaerys I, in true Targaryen fashion, marries his sister, Alyssa Targaryen. Jaehaerys is the king that we see at the beginning of House of the Dragon, symbolized by that very crown we see him wear in the show, and the same one that Viserys eventually wears as well. It's not clear what Alicent's symbol is here, we only get a quick glimpse, but it may as well just be another crown. Jaehaerys and Alicent's bloodline dramatically splits into 9, representing their 9 children. And this brings us more to the characters and scenes we know in the show. After their 2 eldest heirs, Aemon and Balon, both died, there is something of a succession crisis, and that leads to the Great Council that we saw at the beginning of episode 1. Following the line of kings though, the blood trail once again rejoins as Balon and Alyssa, brother and sister, marry and give birth to Viserys I, the king that we know and maybe love, however you feel about them. One really interesting detail here though is that these icons are already flooded when we see them, when we come across Balon and Alyssa. They don't activate the way others do, and that's because unlike other characters, Balon is already dead by the time the crown passes to him, and it goes directly through him to Viserys I, the king that we know from the show. And thematically, people in this world are cogs in a grand machine, working for a time to pump out more blood and heirs before being swallowed down by death themselves. You'll also see that the bloodline splits off here to represent Daemon as well, their second son, Viserys' brother. Viserys himself is represented by the same crown as Jaehaerys. We also get some brief shots around this point of more Targaryen blood spreading into the distance, covering the walls, going everywhere, reflecting how by this point in Westeros history, there are more Targaryens than ever. In Fire and Blood, we read that never before or since had the 7 kingdoms been so blessed or cursed in the view of some with so many Targaryen princelings. Such a confusion of claims and claimants that many maesters believe that the Dance of Dragons was inevitable. These other strands all over the place reflect the houses Velaryon, Arryn, Celtigar, and Baratheon, as well as the bastards who they call Dragon Seeds, who all have Targaryen blood running through their veins at this point. Now, you'll also notice that blood doesn't flow into this icon next to Viserys, and that represents Aemma Arryn, who is, all good and well, not his sister. No, just his cousin. She dies in episode 1, but they do have 1 child, and blood flows out of them both and downward to the next level. You'll also notice if you look closely at the last moment that blood flows out of Viserys in 2 directions, one to the child with his first wife, and one to the children with his second, though you'll have to find out in episode 2 who that wife is. By this time, Targaryen blood is flowing all across the city in all directions. Targaryen blood is everywhere, but it only goes from Viserys to that one person. That's Rhaenyra, represented by the Valyrian steel medallion that Daemon gives her in the opening episode. And the blood stops here, at least for the moment. Rhaenyra doesn't seem to have any children, and the opening will likely change with each season as new generations are born. If you pause at this last moment overlooking the city, you'll also see how the bloodlines at least vaguely match up with the generations of Targaryens from Aegon through Aenys through Jaehaerys through Viserys. But I think this opening doesn't just recount the bloodline of the Targaryens. This last shot of the trailer shows all of these trails pouring into a pit of fire and blood, the very words of House Targaryen. All these trails lead nowhere, and instead fuel the bloody inferno that is the Dance of Dragons, growing larger with every death and betrayal and drop of blood drawn. There's a pointlessness to it here, and one by one, everyone drowns in the river of blood. The opening moves through a model of the Valyrian Freehold, the city of that old Dragon Lord civilization, and the same one that we see Viserys with. Its architecture is monolithic, it's grand and imposing, and you can see the same patterns of jagged wall formations that we see on Dragonstone. The blood running through the streets could even be said to reflect the doom of Valyria itself, and that the Targaryens keeping these old Valyrian ways of the dragons inevitably bring a similar doom upon themselves in Westeros. The doom is theorized to have been caused by a whirl of conflict and deception amongst the great houses that led to too many assassinations, and that sounds an awful lot like the Dance of Dragons to come. And just as bloodlines fall from the peak of this tower and down into this pit into nothing, this is, in some sense, the story of the fall of House Targaryen from greatness to nothing. Whatever the case, the opening captures the tragedy of the Targaryens in this story, who climb as high as dragons can take them, but their nature always brings their downfall, down into the pit of fire and blood.